Liam and Callum, two brothers from the streets of Glasgow, rose from petty thieves to Scotland's most feared crime lords. Their empire was built on fear, fueled by violence, and protected by silence. For over a decade, they ruled the underworld like kings, until betrayal from within tore everything apart. This is the story of how two men became legends, and how those legends came crashing down. The streets of Glasgow in the late 1990s were restless, alive with a mix of poverty, ambition, and unspoken violence. Out of that landscape came two brothers who would grow to cast a shadow longer and darker than anyone could have predicted. Liam and Callum were born into a neighborhood where survival meant being sharper, faster, and harder than the next person. From an early age, they understood that nobody was going to hand them anything. Their father was gone, their mother worked long hours, and the boys quickly learned that power did not come from rules but from breaking them. At first, their ventures seemed small and almost forgettable. They stole cars, stripped them for parts, and sold them to mechanics who never asked questions. They robbed delivery vans, turning basic goods into fast money on the streets. Yet what set them apart from other kids doing the same thing was their ability to think further ahead. They didn't just want a payday, they wanted control. While others wasted money on parties, Liam and Callum invested it back into their schemes, laying foundations that would one day support an empire. As teenagers, they began recruiting friends from school, kids who admired their boldness and feared their anger. The brothers built loyalty not by shouting orders but by showing results. If you followed them, you made money. If you crossed them, you disappeared from their circle as quickly as you entered it. There was a silent authority in the way they operated. Unlike other groups who flaunted stolen jewelry or picked pointless fights, the brothers remained disciplined. They didn't drink too much, didn't leave evidence, and didn't talk to strangers. This made them difficult to track and even harder to stop. Police in Glasgow had seen gangs rise and fall, but this one seemed different. It was organized chaos, directed by two young men who carried themselves like seasoned criminals long before they had earned the title. The turning point came when they discovered drugs. At first, it was small amounts of cannabis, passed around nightclubs and sold outside schools. But soon, through a chance meeting with a contact from England, they secured access to cocaine. It was expensive, risky, and dangerous, but it changed everything. The money poured in faster than they had ever imagined. Suddenly, cars, clothes, and weapons were theirs for the taking. The brothers realized they weren't just playing a game anymore. They were building an empire, one line of powder at a time. What made them feared was not the drugs themselves but the way they distributed them. They controlled every street, every dealer, and every corner. Instead of allowing chaos, they enforced strict rules. Prices never changed without their say. Dealers who tried to steal or cheat were punished brutally, their fates whispered in alleys and bars as warnings to others. The violence was controlled but unforgettable. A rival gang member left bleeding outside a pub. A debt collector found tied to a chair in an abandoned warehouse. These acts were never random, they were messages. The brothers wanted Glasgow to understand one thing: they were untouchable. And for a while, they were. By the end of the decade, their network extended beyond their neighborhood, stretching into towns and cities that once laughed at the thought of two street kids running anything. Now they ran everything. They had lieutenants, enforcers, and loyal soldiers who answered without hesitation. Their influence seeped into clubs, construction companies, even local politicians who found it easier to accept their money than fight them. Every move was a step higher up the ladder, and every victory made them harder to stop. In those early years, before the world truly understood what was happening, the brothers rose like smoke from a fire. Silent, steady, and unstoppable, they became Scotland's most dangerous secret. And while the people of Glasgow whispered their names with fear, Liam and Callum knew that this was only the beginning. As the years moved into the early 2000s, the brothers transformed from local criminals into powerful figures who seemed to control entire neighborhoods with little more than a nod. Their influence seeped into every corner of Glasgow and beyond, tightening around the city like a grip that no one could loosen. The pubs and nightclubs that once ignored them now depended on their money. Small businesses that refused their presence were taught sharp lessons. Firebombs lit up the night, shattered glass spilled onto pavements, and silence became the only option for those who wanted to live without looking over their shoulder. To the ordinary residents, the brothers were ghosts in the shadows, rarely seen but always felt. People learned that you didn't need to meet Liam or Callum to fear them, the stories alone were enough. It wasn't just brutality that set them apart. They had a level of structure that other gangs lacked. Their members were divided into layers of responsibility, each knowing only enough to do their job but never enough to expose the full operation. This meant that even when police arrested lower-level dealers, nothing important was revealed. The brothers treated their gang like a business, and in many ways, that's what it became. They ran protection rackets on construction projects, ensuring that no worker laid a single brick unless permission was granted. They funneled drug profits through cash-heavy businesses like nightclubs and car washes, making it nearly impossible for investigators to separate clean money from dirty. Their ability to instill fear without speaking directly to anyone became their strongest weapon. A shopkeeper who resisted paying protection fees would often wake to find his windows shattered or his car destroyed. In extreme cases, families were targeted, not harmed but threatened in ways that left lasting scars. The fear spread faster than the violence itself. People complied long before they had to because they understood the consequences of saying no. Rival gangs tried, at times, to push against them, but the response was swift and devastating. A rival leader might be found beaten within an inch of his life or left in a public place as a warning to others. Very quickly, most rivals stopped trying altogether. The brothers also had a gift for connection. Unlike smaller groups who fought over scraps, they built relationships with suppliers across borders. Through contacts in England and Ireland, they gained access to steady streams of drugs, cutting out middlemen and keeping costs lower than anyone else could manage. This gave them dominance not just in Glasgow but in surrounding towns where their product was both cheaper and more reliable. Dealers had no choice but to work under their banner or be driven out altogether. Those who resisted found themselves isolated, unable to move anything without facing threats or sudden disappearances. By now, whispers of corruption began to circulate. It was said that some officers turned a blind eye, their silence bought with thick envelopes or subtle threats. Politicians, too, were rumored to be under their influence, though nothing could ever be proven. The brothers had woven themselves into the very fabric of Scotland's underworld, hidden in plain sight while their reputation grew darker with each passing year. What made them especially terrifying was the precision of their violence. They didn't waste bullets or fists on pointless brawls. Every attack was calculated, every message carefully designed to remind people of who truly held power. One club owner who tried to break free from their grip was found hanging upside down from his own rafters, alive but terrified beyond repair. Another businessman discovered his entire warehouse burned to ashes overnight, the only clue a single note left behind with 2 words, "Never again." These incidents spread like wildfire, cementing the idea that the brothers weren't just criminals, they were the law of the streets. And yet, beneath this reign of fear, there was also a strange admiration. Some young men dreamed of joining them, seeing Liam and Callum as proof that anyone could rise from nothing to command respect. They represented both a nightmare and a twisted dream, symbols of power carved out of poverty. Parents warned their children to stay away, but the allure of money and influence was too strong for many to resist. By the height of their rule, the brothers had created something more than a gang. They had built a system, a shadow society that operated alongside the legitimate one. It thrived on silence, loyalty, and fear. And for everyone living under it, one truth became undeniable: in Scotland, power no longer rested in the hands of politicians or police. It belonged to Liam and Callum, the 2 brothers who had turned crime into an empire. The fall of the brothers did not arrive like a sudden storm but crept in quietly, disguised as small cracks that spread until the empire they had built began to collapse under its own weight. For years they had evaded the police, sidestepping raids, silencing witnesses, and moving faster than the law could follow. But power always attracts enemies, and the brothers had created many, not only in the streets but within their own circle. One of their trusted lieutenants, a man who had been with them from the early days, began to question his place. Facing pressure from the police and fearing a long prison sentence, he made a choice that would change everything. He turned informant, secretly feeding investigators information piece by piece until the brothers' carefully hidden empire was no longer invisible. The police had long struggled to pin anything significant on Liam and Callum, but the informant gave them a roadmap. He revealed warehouses where drugs were stored, accounts hidden in offshore banks, and the names of men who acted as enforcers. Suddenly the picture was clear, and for the first time in years, law enforcement had hope of tearing down the empire that had gripped Scotland for so long. Surveillance teams tracked the brothers' every move, recording meetings, following cars, and listening in on conversations that they thought were private. Each detail, no matter how small, built the case brick by brick until the structure began to tremble. The raids came swiftly and without warning. Police descended on safehouses across Glasgow, seizing millions in drugs and cash. Cars, weapons, and ledgers were dragged out into the light, evidence that could not be denied. Dealers were arrested in waves, and with each one, the silence that had protected the brothers began to break. Some faced sentences too long to bear and decided that betrayal was easier than loyalty. Men who had once sworn to protect the brothers started speaking, trading secrets for shorter terms, their words tearing at the foundations of the empire. Liam and Callum had always believed that fear would be enough to keep their circle loyal. But when the walls closed in, fear shifted its direction. No longer was it fear of the brothers, it became fear of losing freedom, of decades spent behind bars. That shift was deadly. Information spread faster than the brothers could contain it, and soon the police had more than they had ever dreamed possible. The betrayal cut deeper because it came not from rivals but from within. A man who had once been like family to them sat across from detectives and described, in chilling detail, the inner workings of their organization. His testimony connected every dot, from the smallest street dealer to the offshore accounts that hid their profits. It was no longer a guessing game. The police had the map, the tools, and the witnesses they needed. The community, too, began to change. For years people had lived under the brothers' shadow, terrified of speaking out. But as news of arrests spread and stories leaked about their operations, some found the courage to step forward. Business owners whispered about threats, families revealed how they had been harassed, and slowly, the silence that had protected the brothers cracked apart. It was as if the entire city had been holding its breath for years and finally dared to exhale. For Liam and Callum, the downfall was as shocking as it was inevitable. They had built their empire on loyalty and fear, but loyalty dissolved when freedom was threatened, and fear shifted once it became clear that the brothers could bleed like any other man. The law, which had once seemed powerless against them, now moved with precision and force. Every raid, every arrest, every confession chipped away at their power until the once untouchable kings of the underworld were cornered with nowhere left to run. In the end, it wasn't a rival gang or a dramatic shootout that destroyed them. It was betrayal, a slow and methodical unraveling of everything they had built. For years they had ruled the streets with iron fists, but their empire collapsed not in fire and blood but in courtrooms, interrogation rooms, and whispered confessions. And as Scotland watched, the legend of the brothers shifted from one of fear and power to one of downfall and disgrace, proof that no matter how strong an empire seems, it can crumble when those inside decide to tear it apart. The courtroom became the stage where the brothers' empire was finally laid bare, every secret dragged into the light for the world to see. Crowds gathered outside each day, journalists filled every available seat, and the public followed every headline with hungry fascination. Scotland had lived in the shadow of Liam and Callum for more than a decade, but now the curtain was being pulled back, and what was revealed was darker than anyone had imagined. Witnesses described years of intimidation, stories of homes burned to the ground, businesses crushed under protection fees, and communities silenced through fear. Former allies took the stand, their faces pale as they recounted the brutal punishments delivered for disobedience. Some spoke of torture, others of killings that had never been reported, each testimony adding another layer of horror to the brothers' legacy. The trial lasted months, a relentless march of evidence and accusation. Boxes of documents revealed offshore accounts holding millions, records of cash funneled through nightclubs and construction projects, and surveillance footage showing meetings once thought untouchable. The brothers, once so composed and calculating, were forced to sit silently as their empire was dismantled detail by detail in front of a nation. Every revelation chipped away at their myth of invincibility. They were no longer legends in the shadows, they were men exposed, vulnerable and cornered. When the verdict finally came, it landed like thunder. Both Liam and Callum were handed life sentences, their power stripped away in a single moment. The courtroom erupted with a mix of relief and tension, families of victims shedding tears while others simply sat in stunned silence. For many, it felt like the end of an era, the closing of a chapter that had haunted Scotland for too long. Yet the weight of their influence did not disappear overnight. The fear they had instilled remained in the streets, in the whispers of those who still wondered if their reach truly ended with a prison sentence. In prison, the brothers became symbols rather than leaders. Younger inmates idolized them, drawn to the stories of how two men from nothing had risen to rule an empire. For others, they were a warning, proof that even the most feared men could be brought down. The myth grew with each retelling, blending fact and rumor until it became difficult to separate what had really happened from what had been imagined. Some claimed the brothers still controlled operations from behind bars, that coded messages left prison walls to guide the remnants of their network. Others swore the organization had been shattered completely, nothing more than a ghost of its former self. Outside the walls, the effects of their downfall were mixed. Communities once strangled by fear began to rebuild, businesses reopened without the weight of protection fees, and families who had remained silent for years finally spoke freely. Yet the vacuum left by the brothers did not remain empty. Rival groups quickly emerged, each eager to claim the territory once controlled with such ruthless precision. The violence that followed was chaotic, lacking the discipline the brothers had enforced, and in some ways, it was even more unpredictable. Scotland discovered that removing its most dangerous gang did not erase crime but instead fractured it into smaller, more volatile pieces. Still, the legend of the brothers lingered. They were spoken of in hushed tones, their names etched into the memory of Glasgow's underworld. Parents told their children of the years when two men held an entire city in fear, warning them of the cost of chasing power. Writers, filmmakers, and journalists revisited their story, each trying to capture the strange mix of terror and fascination they inspired. For some, they were monsters who had destroyed lives without remorse. For others, they were tragic figures, men who had built an empire only to lose everything to betrayal. The true legacy of the brothers was not measured in the drugs they sold or the money they laundered but in the silence they had created. For years, people had swallowed their words, too afraid to speak against them. When the silence finally broke, it brought their empire crashing down. Yet even in their defeat, the question remained unsettled: was their story truly over, or had they left behind seeds that would grow again in the dark corners of Scotland's streets? For every whisper that said they were finished, there was another that suggested the brothers were still watching, still waiting, their empire not destroyed but merely hidden. And so the legend endures, a chilling reminder that power gained through fear may fall, but it is never truly forgotten. Thanks for watching.